Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. My name is Lindsay. I'm with Infinity Workforce Solutions. Today we are talking to Monica Narvaez. She's an attorney with Estes, Thorne and Carr out of Dallas. How are you doing today, Monica?
I am doing great. Sorry, I had myself on mute. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. So thanks for joining us today. We're really glad you're here. Can you give us a little bit of information about what you do?
Yeah, I am a labor and employment attorney in Dallas, Texas. But my background is actually as a human resources professional. So I did that before I became a lawyer. So my focus in my practice is more on helping companies work through the law in order to make their businesses grow and expand. Basically using the law as another business tool.
Oh, that is so interesting. I love to hear that. So what we're talking about today is how to focus on returning back to work after all of the coronavirus issues that we've had and COVID-19 issues. We're going to talk about some problems that you might be likely to encounter and try to offer some suggestions for employers on what they should do and how to prepare for their employees' return. So I kind of want to set the tone for that discussion by talking about the emotional impact that the pandemic has had on employees. So they've been at home, working from home, or they've been isolated from their other coworkers. So their normal, what we've always been used to, has just been flipped upside down. So when we're doing our preparation to reopen, we need to keep that in mind, that our employees might come back to work a little changed from the, what was normal. So some people might have been laid off, working from home. Some people are ready to get back. If you're like me, I can't stay at home. I would be ready to get back in the office and be around all the people. Some people, though, might have a hard time transitioning back into full-time office work. It can be intimidating for some people to get back into that. So it's important for employers to recognize those struggles, and that for some employees, that assimilation back into the old normal might take some time. And we can't expect every employee to jump back in like nothing ever happened. So we've been through some stuff here. Monica, how can employers anticipate some of the anxieties about returning back to work?
I think the biggest thing is that employers now need to anticipate it if they weren't already, because it is such an unprecedented time. So basically, I am getting a lot of input from my employer clients that their employees are worried about catching the virus. They're worried about what happens if their family member catches the virus. They're worried about the viability of the company. They're worried about a second wave. They're worried about what happens if their kid's school doesn't open or if the daycare closes. What does that mean for their job? What does that mean? So they've just got a lot of stuff going on in their head. And then on top of it, they're trying to juggle that and stay productive so they don't get laid off. And so I think, the more employers can understand that, the better, because, because it helps to make the employees more efficient, which means more profits for the business. But two, because there could be some protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act with all this anxiety and stress. So.
Yeah, that's true. There's so many unknowns, and the psychology of your employees may involve a little bit of fear, all the things that you just talked about.
Absolutely.
So all that to add on top of everything else. So what can employers do to ease the transition back into the office and create an encouraging workspace for everybody?
I think the biggest thing is communication. And right now, because nobody really knows what's going on, what's going to happen, I'm on so many fronts. Nobody knows what's going to happen with the economy. Nobody knows how this virus really spreads or anything. And so the more open and honest the employer can be, the better, for two reasons. One, because it helps to allay some of the fears. But two, so that if you do get challenged through a lawsuit or some kind of a government action, you can truly say, look, we kept everybody on notice. We were completely transparent, and they knew they could potentially be laid off. They knew this could potentially happen. They knew, and that helps you defend. So if for no other reason to help you defend in a lawsuit, but honestly, just to keep your employees as engaged as possible so that your company can thrive.
Okay, thank you for that. So I would like to talk about some of the regulations that OSHA has come out with too. So there's a lot of considerations there to keep in mind.
Yeah, the latest goodie out of OSHA that I definitely want to highlight, and I'm going to go into some more legal updates also, but the most recent one that is, in my opinion, extraordinary, is OSHA has released guidance, and it's not even guidance, it's basically mandatory now for any employee that tests positive, the employer has to investigate. And nobody really knows what that means, but you have to try and figure out where the employee contracted the virus. So keeping in mind, getting into their business as far as medical, because you gotta protect things under HIPAA, you do need to ask, where they've been, where they think they got it. You have to do at least a cursory investigation, and there is some guidance out of OSHA on some questions to ask, but you have to do it. Now, whether you figure it out or not is a completely different story, but you have to investigate. And that is huge because it's adding another thing to, HR or a manager's job. But two, that is another way for OSHA to come in and ding you. And, right now OSHA has been on the uptick as far as trying to get out there and auditing. And so that's a real concern. So I definitely refer everybody to the latest guidance on OSHA. You should be able to find it really quick. If not, we can send it out. But it's an extraordinary move.
Yeah. So what would an employer do if you have to keep up with temperatures and keep up with, if people are having symptoms, or, how do you maintain your employees' privacy if you have to communicate with your other employees that someone was exposed?
Well, the biggest thing that came out right away, and this is something that's actually not necessarily new, the EEOC blessed temperature checks back in 2009 after the swine flu outbreak. But it's only in the case of a pandemic, which we are still in. So the employer can take the temperature of every employee and ask about symptoms, right? So they can do that when they come in every day. What my advice is to employers is twofold. One, you want to keep that as private as possible. And two, you want to make sure that you're maintaining the records, because under OSHA, you have to show that you might have to show that you did tests. You don't have to do the temperature checks, but if you are going to, then you need to show that you did it. And what does that mean? Basically, it means that because of HIPAA, just like any kind of disability issues that you would have with employees, or say Family Medical Leave Act leave, you want to make sure you're keeping that information locked up. Nobody has access but for one, maybe two people. You're not announcing, if somebody comes in and they have a 101 fever, be as discreet as possible. Don't go, oh my God, Joe tested 102, what the heck, so don't do that. But, realistically, there's going to be some people that probably find out. Another thing that has come out, the EEOC is allowing now, this is another sort of an extraordinary thing. It's been out for a few weeks. Employers can actually require employees to be tested for the virus. Not the antibodies, just the actual virus. And the employer can do that on site if they want to. And again, if they do that, then they need to make sure that they're very carefully guarding those results. And, say it's an instant test. I haven't been tested myself, so I'm not sure if it's an instant result, but you don't want people looking over the shoulder and be like, oh my God, what'd you get? Did you get positive, negative? So you need to make sure that you're keeping that type of information safe and secure. And if somebody does test positive, or say somebody calls in and says that they are positive and you ask them to stay at home, Under OSHA, you do have to let the rest of the workforce know that somebody potentially tested positive or somebody did test positive. But unless that employee has said otherwise, you cannot disclose that person's name. Now, realistically, in a small workplace, everybody's going to figure out who it is, and that is okay as long as the employer doesn't tell everybody. And if the employer, my advice would be, if you hear people talking about it, it's like, oh my God, did you hear that Sally got the Rona? Then I would kind of just try to tamp that down and, just say, look, we don't share medical advice around here, so you can guard yourself. But those are some updates on the testing front.
Okay, thank you so much for that information. It's so helpful. So the next one, keeping all that in mind, Monica has prepared a presentation for us. She's going to give you some advice on what employers can do to kind of navigate through these issues that we've been talking about. So Monica, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Real quick, I'm going to give a background of a few more updates. My whole hope for this is that employers are able to come up with a plan, something. It doesn't have to be a big efficient plan, but just some sort of plan so that they can strategically reopen. And my hope is that through this, you'll at least have a really good idea of the issues that you need to consider, because there's probably a lot that you haven't, because that's what lawyers are paid to do, is come up with problems. So it's, I would advise everybody to just kind of step back and think about these things for a minute. But with that background, one thing that I want to bring up is, and this is actually twofold. If you have any employees that are in the National Guard, USERRA, which is the Uniformed Services Act, it's not a new law. It's been around forever. Well, not forever, but a long time. You need to watch that for two reasons. Right now, it's become an issue because of the demonstrations and the protests. And there are some states that are activating the National Guard. But it was also happening in some states, apparently, for enforcing stay-at-home orders. And so, you'd have to look at your state to see if your state activated the National Guard for that. But they were in some cases. And the reason why I bring it up is because there are certain rights that those National Guard employees get for being off. It's based on days, if it's less than 30 or over 30. But basically they're just on a leave of absence. They get their job back when they come back, and they come back with the same benefits as they would have had they stayed there. So that's a total 30,000-mile overview, but I throw that out there because I don't know that a lot of employers are thinking about USERRA. Another thing, for any employers in California, or if you have any employees in California, and I'm bringing this up because I think this is going to be the start of a trend. In California, Governor Newsom signed an executive order a few weeks back that for any essential worker, if a business had an essential worker and they were required to keep working after, I believe it was March 19th, if they ultimately test positive or tested positive for coronavirus, it is presumed that they caught it at work for purposes of workers' compensation. So that is huge for workers' comp, but I really honestly think that with that executive order and OSHA's requirement for investigations, my guess is that OSHA, there's going to be some sort of a national kind of push for approving workers' comp claims for anybody who tests positive at work, or at the very least, mandatory contact tracing. So keep an eye on that. Workers' comp is going to be the biggest one, and because realistically, how do you prove if somebody got it at work? You can't. So the only way you can defend yourself is to say, look, the person never came in contact with any other people. We had all these cleaning protocols, things like that. This is why the documentation is going to be important. Another thing that I would advise any employer to do is regularly check the websites for the CDC and OSHA, because they are regularly putting out guidance and protocols that they deem worthy of putting out. And the beauty of that is they're pretty helpful, I think, but it also helps the employer if you're following the CDC guidance and they come and the OSHA comes in and says, well, you didn't do this right. You're like, well, I followed the CDC guidance and here's how I can show you how I followed it. Why are you dinging me? So it's very helpful. The other thing, the SBA has put out guidance for any employers that took those PPP loans. They issued guidance for how to avoid an audit if you're trying to ask for forgiveness. So that's something you might want to look into. And then finally, the FDA, so the Food and Drug Administration, is being touted by the EEOC as one of the places to look for guidance on testing. So, you know, to me that seems a little random, but whatever. I would consult that website, because if you are going to be testing your employees, the FDA has some information on that there. And then on top of all that, you need to look at your state, any state laws, any county laws or acts, and cities sometimes have them. I mean, it is all over the board. So with that, you know, what I wanted to go into is, you know, how do you strategically reopen? Assuming that basically you are going to be doing business as usual, and obviously not every state is open at 100%. But, you know, a lot of them are getting there. Like, for example, Texas, the phase 3 just rolled out last night, so it's going to happen soon. How do you do that? And the biggest thing, I think, is you got to come up with a plan, obviously. And what is in that plan? Could you go to the next slide, Lindsay? Thank you. These are just some high-level considerations. And again, we'll be sending out more information so you can kind of have some deeper guidance. But assuming that your business is going to stay the same, you're going to only have to worry about certain things. But there are a lot of employers out there that changed what they did, or they're adding another business segment. And so, you know, you need to consider things like, if your business is going to stay the same, do you still need the same level of staff? Are you going to bring everybody back? Were they on a furlough? Were they laid off? That makes a difference, because in a furlough situation, they remained an employee and you can just call them back. Whereas if they were laid off, you have to rehire them. So that comes with some immigration, you know, the I-9 check issues for layoffs. Another thing is, if you have changed what you're doing as far as business offerings, like a lot of companies, you know, started shipping different types of cargo. And what does that mean? Do the employees that you had before that were shipping whatever, are they qualified to pivot and do the new duties? So that's something to consider, because if they can't, can you keep them as an employee, or do you need to lay those people off? So you have some layoff considerations. The other thing is, you know, once you've figured out which employees it is that you need, and in most cases, I think in the transportation industry, the large majority of people cannot work from home, but there might be some office staff that can. And so you need to consider the work from home issues, such as, one, do you have the technology to support it? Do you have cybersecurity protections? Another thing, and this is always a shock when I tell people, workers' comp and OSHA still apply to employees that work from home. So how do you deal with that? You have to make sure that they don't have known hazards in their home, which is a little weird, especially with social distancing right now. You're not going to show up at their house and do a, you know, safety check. But you have to consider those things. And I throw that out there because working from home there are some benefits to it, in that the expanded, the CARES Act, basically, I'll just refer to as that because everybody knows it. They expanded the paid time off at 10 days of leave. And then also the Family Medical Leave Act was expanded by 10 weeks. but that only applies to employees that cannot work from home. So it's important to consider whether or not you've got anybody that could work from home. And if they can, let them. Obviously, if they're not doing their job, that's a different issue. But if they are able to actually successfully work from home, I would at least consider it, because it helps you as the employer. It helps keep things rolling. But the big thing are, the safety issues. And what does that mean? Right now, it's all over the board because there are so many different county judges and governors fighting with each other, and all you have to do is turn on the news and see. But underlying all of that is the general duty clause of OSHA, which is not new. It's always been in place, but I think that a lot of employers forget about it because it's one of those things that OSHA was sort of like, in my opinion, the sleeper agency. It's only recently that they've sort of kind of been like, hey, we're here, we can do stuff too. So you have to consider what in your workplace would make it safe. So if you are in, a place where people are not on top of each other, they don't really have any interaction with people, maybe they don't need to wear masks. But if you've got people that stand right next to each other, they're probably going to need masks. And then obviously the 6-foot social distancing protocols that are still in place, and the hand washing protocols that are still in place. But as far as the protective equipment, if it's something that's deemed required, it's going to have to be provided for by the employer. So that's sort of the big thing is, do you have to buy sanitization, stations, stuff like that? Do you have to buy Clorox wipes? Not that you can, because they're not anywhere, but do you have to buy the hand sanitizer? Those are all the types of things that you need to consider, but it's all based on your work environment. Same thing with gloves. If like say for example, you've got drivers that are constantly out getting gas, they might want to wear gloves because allegedly one of the vectors for the virus is the gas handles. Again, nobody really knows how it transmits and all that, but for the time being, we have to assume. And so those are the types of things that you would look at. But the very first place that I would look and keep up with is OSHA and the CDC, because they are the start of what is the latest in safety protocols. And then you go to the state. So like in Texas, there's the state health services, DSHS, and they've got guidance out there. So, as long as you're trying to follow it, you have a better defense for yourself. But another thing to consider as far as the safety precautions is, what does the workplace even look like? Okay, so assuming that people can't work from home, they're going to come back in the office. What does that mean? Do people have desks that face each other? You probably can't have that, because how do you sit 6 feet apart? So you probably have to have the desks be further apart. Another consideration that some employers are thinking is like, do we even have a break room anymore? Do we allow employees to use the communal coffee pot? And, I saw something recently, and I think it was just guidance, but I think it was from the CDC. They said, just don't. But if you have a Keurig, it's just, those are the types of things that you have to consider and tell people what they need to do. So if you're gonna allow them to keep using the company fridge, then maybe tell them to wipe down the handle after with some sort of a wipe or something like that. And then I guess not at the end, but one of the other considerations is, who is the person that's going to be the point person and taking care of all this? Who's going to be watching the pot, so to speak? If you have a safety manager, that would make sense to me. But if you don't, somebody needs to have a schedule of cleaning, to show what they've done, how often they've done it, because realistically, you need to be able to show OSHA if they come in, because either somebody tested positive or somebody complained that, yes, we are keeping the place clean. So document So the first thing, communicate, communicate, communicate. And then the next thing is document, document, document. Let's see, I'm trying to think, I'm going through my notes to make sure that I cover everything as far as safety, because that's the biggest thing. There is a flow chart that the CDC put out, I want to say it was last week, and it was guidance for employers as the companies reopened. I would advise everybody to look at that. It's a real quick flow chart, but it starts with, one, are you allowed to reopen if you're not essential? And I probably should step back a bit. Any transportation is essential, but there might be some parts of the business that is not essential. And you need to look at that because there already is litigation on which people actually are essential and what does that mean for the company. You just need to be able to answer it if somebody questions you, because employees are watching. The last thing that I would say about safety is under OSHA, they are requiring, and they do in general, but they're pushing it more. Train your managers and supervisors to look for issues. If there are known hazards that they know about, they need to do something about it or fix it, get somebody to fix it. But also they need to look for the signs and symptoms of illness. They need to look for mental illness of employees. This is an issue also. And they just basically need to be more hyper vigilant. And you need to train your employees too, like on hand washing and all that kind of stuff. But you really need to train your managers so that the managers can sort of be the babysitters in the workplace. So that's kind of the big things for safety and precautions and what should go in your plan.
Okay, thank you so much for that. A couple of the things that I wanted to ask you about during that was, to what extent is management required to enforce those new safety rules? So you talked about having like a schedule, and is a check mark okay? Like, okay, we clean the fridge.
Yeah, I would say a check mark is okay. I would put, and a lot of companies already do this. You see it in the public restrooms. You see the initials of the employee and a checklist at a time, or a check mark at a time. That works. So, why fix it? I definitely would put initials. And the reason being is, if you've assigned one person to do it, you want, one, make sure that they're doing it, but two, if you've got 5 other employees that are also doing it, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing because then it's extra clean. But if they're taking time away from their work and going to clean the bathroom because they're obsessive compulsive, that might be an issue. So I would ask for anybody that does cleaning to put their initials. And realistically, it's, from just putting my lawyer hat on, it's so that if OSHA does come calling, you can say, all right, John cleaned the bathroom. I can tell that from the initials, and let's go talk to John and see what he did.
So documentation,
yes.
All the way.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So I want to talk about the, when you get to the reopening part of it, you're going to have all these processes and plans that you've put in place, hopefully, and make sure you're considering all the things that you've talked about. So at Infinity Workforce, we are constantly kind of adapting to meet the needs of the business. So we'll change certain procedures, or we'll move people around, or do whatever we need to do, make changes to the handbook. And in our company, we're a small company. So our HR director can actually just walk around and, hand out our essential employee letter to us, or she can hand out, here's a change to the handbook we just made. But for larger companies, or for companies who have drivers all across the country that they can't just go hand them a letter, having some kind of communication platform is so important for those. You got trucks all over the country, so it's not simple to just hand out new documentation to everybody. So to the viewers here today that are in management or in HR, some of the things you might want to consider are, do you have a communication plan in place for your current employees? Have you made any procedural changes? And if you have, how are you communicating those to your employees? How do they know how to be compliant with the changes that you've made? How do you get those out to everybody? So what's your distribution plan in new rules, new regulations, new procedures? And I think that's going to be one of the things you need to have really solidified in before people start returning back to work. How do we let them know what to expect when they come back? And so to that, we've got some poll questions. I would like to ask the audience a couple of questions here. The first one, how are you preparing employees for the return with training about new rules, new procedures? So are you guys using some kind of online platform? Are you planning on doing in-person, small group presentations? Are you planning on doing large group presentations, which is going to be difficult because of the social distancing protocol? So normally we might do a departmental meeting and train everybody in the department, or conference calls, which would be a less technological way to do it. More difficult to track too. The second question, how are you gauging your employees' understanding of the new operating procedures? So when you do have these new procedures in place and you've assigned training to your employees, are you quizzing them to make sure they understand the material? Do you have a sign-in sheet? Are you just kind of not testing them, hoping they just get it, or looking at other options there? And the third, how are you communicating any new terminal procedures to your drivers? So it's going to be easier for companies to communicate new procedures with their operations employees, or ones that are on the at the terminal every day. But your drivers who may be 2,000 miles away, how do you let them know, hey, when you get back to the terminal, make sure you have a mask, make sure you wash your hands, all the things that they need to know before they get back and come in contact with all your in-house employees. So we're getting lots of answers there. I'll give it just another couple of seconds. Okay, so we'll take a look at the results just so everybody kind of sees where we're all at. So a lot of people, about half the people are doing online training. I think this is the best way to go, especially since we're doing social distancing. We can't be, 6 feet from each, we have to be 6 feet from each other. So being able to send out online training immediately is the best option when we're dealing with this kind of stuff. So on the next question, 43% of people said they're quizzing to kind of measure the retention, how their employees are understanding of the training materials that they're sending out. I think that's the best way to do it too. You can always do a sign-in sheet if people come into a meeting. You really can't guarantee that they listen though. They might be on their phone or taking a nap during your meeting. I've seen that before. And how are you communicating any new terminal procedures to your drivers? So we said online training again. That's the best because again, that remote training, they can watch it from their tractor, hang out in the sleeper berth and watch some training videos. That's the best way to do it, I think. So, okay, thank you guys so much for those. After that, I want to give out Monica's contact information. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We were going to talk about preparing for lawsuits. So what are some of the potential lawsuits that might come out of all this stuff?
There actually, oddly enough, there's a law firm that started a list tracking of all of these lawsuits. And as of yesterday, there were already 2,409 lawsuits directly related to COVID-19. In Texas, there was only 157. And I just watched that just because I happen to be based in Texas, but 2,400 is huge. And the reason why I say that is because right now there's sort of a lull. One, on both sides. Employees don't really know yet what to do because they're not exactly sure if their company is going to stay in business or if they're going to get called back to work. So they're not maybe necessarily filing a lawsuit yet because they're not out of a job. So this is going to hit, I think, later in the year, probably third quarter. And one of the things that I wanted to throw out there that's becoming an issue And maybe it won't be until after July, but I know as people are starting to reopen again, it is becoming an issue, is this idea of the federal supplement to the unemployment. And it has created an issue of a lot of people. I think I saw a statistic that at least 30% in every state of people that are receiving unemployment, they are making more money on unemployment than they were in their job. And so it's not going to come as a shock to anybody that they want to stay on unemployment. The problem is there's two problems. One, that supposedly is going to end on July 31st. I don't know if it will because this is an election year, but allegedly it's going to. The other problem is you can only get that while you're eligible for unemployment. If the employer has work available and calls the employee back and they say no, they are not eligible for unemployment. But the flip side of that is the employer has to tell the unemployment bureau that the person declined work. So one, the employer has to do another step. Two, that's assuming you can even get through, because I think the lines are still jammed in most states. So this is going to be an issue. Employers are going to have a hard time bringing some people back, I think. I really think. And it's going to create a different type of labor shortage than before. Before there was too many jobs and not enough people. Now it's going to be finding the people that want to maybe take a pay cut to come back to work, knowing that in the long run that'll give them a job. So that is one of the things that I'm watching very closely, because I think it's going to create legal issues. I just feel like it's going to create, somehow it's going to create some lawsuit, because there's going to be some lawyer who's going to think of something. But the other thing that is associated with that, and then I'm going to get into the regular lawsuits that are out there, the ones that are actually out there, is that if somebody is afraid to come back to work and that's their reason for declining coming back, is right now fear in and of itself of getting the virus is probably not a disability, because the virus is not a disability, but that's right now. The problem is anxiety and stress and fear at a certain level that makes you so that you can't function could be a disability. And therefore, when somebody just says, I can't come back, you can't just say, well, guess what? You're fired and I'm going to report you. You probably are going to have to ask them why. Do they have a doctor's note that says, they're pregnant and their doctor wants them to stay out for 5 more weeks because they just don't know the effects of this virus? That is probably, if the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to you, which if you have over 15 employees, it will, you're going to have to at least consider some sort of an accommodation. Or, what do you do? So it's not just an easy yes or no situation. You have to do some analysis. Otherwise, you're going to get a disability discrimination lawsuit. And in general, and then I'm going to go into the lawsuits, when there is a downturn in the economy, if there is a recession, there is a huge uptick of lawsuits. And the reason why is, in order to have a successful employment litigation, you need to have damages. And damages, there's multiple aspects, but one of the biggest one is that you can't find work. So it's lost wages. And right now, when there's not a lot of jobs out there, you're not going to be able to just go get a job at the end of the day like we've been experiencing for the past 5 years or so. And so you're going to actually have damages, and people are going to pursue more lawsuits. So with that, the lawsuits that are already out there, and these are in every state, it's not, this is something you got to watch for in every state. Workers' comp, so they caught it at work and they're suing under workers' comp because workers' comp is either denied their payment or whatever. OSHA, there's OSHA complaints on failing to give enough protective equipment. That there are employers that said that their employees were essential, but they really weren't. So they're mad. So they're basically being whistleblowers and saying that these employers didn't shut down. There's a lot of those. Negligence in the cleaning of the workplace that maybe puts people at risk. There's lawsuits on that now. if you are involved in layoffs, there is an act called the Worker Adjustment and Reemployment Notice, the WARN Act. And some states actually have their own version, but the federal one is called WARN, and it's only triggered with a certain number of layoffs, but there are a lot of lawsuits out there already because the notices weren't sent. So that's something to consider. That's the WARN, W-A-R-N Act. Another thing is if you have any employees that are under employment contracts and you terminated those contracts, then, is that a violation? Was there any kind of a force majeure clause in there that allowed you to terminate the contract? There's a lot of lawsuits on that. Improper leave denials, so those expanded leaves under the FMLA and the PTO, it's being denied in some cases because the employer believes that they're exempt, but in some cases it's just because they're like, no, I'm not going to give it to you. So there's lawsuits on that. Discrimination complaints are on the rise for a couple things. Asian Americans, there's a lot of Asia-specific discrimination going on because of the coronavirus. And older workers, because there are employers that they know that older workers are potentially more fragile. They're not fragile. They're in a more highly, I don't even know how to say this. Actually, the EEOC had to issue guidance, and they said it's called benevolent discrimination. So basically they're saying do not assume that just because the person is old or has an underlying condition that they're disabled and they can't come back to work. You have to wait for them to ask, and then you do the interactive process to see if they would be a threat to the workplace or a threat to themselves. But don't assume. But there's lawsuits where the employers are not allowing older workers to come back or people with cancer. And then people that have coronavirus have been allegedly retaliated against. They're not allowed to come into the workplace. They've been fired because they had the coronavirus. Wage issues is another big one. So either not paying your people properly, not paying them, maybe say hazard pay that they had the right to, if you furloughed any exempt, like salaried employees, and you did not do it for an entire week. So say, for example, you furloughed them for 2 days out of the week, that does not count. You have to pay them for the whole week for salaried employees. So there's actually a lot of lawsuits out there about that kind of thing, that the wages were not paid properly. And then finally, just unlawful termination. So basically, people were saying that the layoffs and the furloughs were unlawful. So those are the kind of the big issues, and I say that because it pretty much covers every area of employment law. And the only other thing that I would add is, because this is a lawsuit in the making, if there is a vaccine that comes out, hopefully there will be, is it going to be mandatory? Right now, you cannot make vaccines mandatory unless it's in some sort of an industry where, like say for nursing homes or something like that, there might be an exemption. But for the average everyday employer, you cannot require a vaccine. But I know that there's going to be employers that think they want a health certificate. I'm starting to see this with airlines. There's allegedly they're going to require health certificates. Well, what does that mean? So that is going to potentially be another area of legal action coming down the pike. So.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That's interesting about the vaccines and wanting to hopefully encourage your employees to get that, but not requiring it. And how do you keep backlash off of those employees who choose not to get it?
Yep.
Okay, so Monica, we've got your contact information here. If anybody has any questions about reopening or what they should do as as management to keep their employees safe and everything else, they can contact you.
Yes.
We've got your email address and your phone number here. I would also like to put up one more poll question. We have some Q&As. We'll get to those in just a second. But this poll question, so right now we have a 30-day complimentary trial going on here at Infinity Workforce Solutions. So everybody can, anyone who is not a current client can use our product for 30 days. It can help them increase their communication. And it is absolutely the best tool for documentation and keeping up with making sure that you are covered in everything that you're doing. Or if anyone would like Monica to contact them, they can put a yes here, and you can reach out to them with help them with any questions they may have.
Great.
So we'll leave that up for just a second. So to close here, we've talked about all of these things. Make sure when you are planning your reopen, you want to make sure we are cleaning the facilities. We have a plan in place for that. We've got a plan in place for equipment sanitation, new practices. We want to make sure we are getting our employees up to speed on all the procedural changes that we've made, make sure we're training everybody properly. The physical and mental health checks, that was interesting to me. That's something I didn't think about, the mental health checks.
Yeah.
Making sure that everybody is coming back to work, still encouraged and comfortable where they are.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in real quick on that. And the reason why is, one, employees are sort of demanding it now because they're so stressed out. But under OSHA, there is some requirements for part of a safe workplace is what if somebody comes back and harms workers. So that's why it's important to look for that.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. That's something I would not have thought about. And then making sure that we know that we have a medical or legal response team that's ready to go, that has a plan for issues that might come up. So COVID-19, coronavirus is not gone. And we are looking, we could see a second wave potentially. And what happens if all this starts over again? We need to make sure we've got all those plans in place for that. Okay, so here's just a little bit more information about our 30-day trial. If anybody out there wants to get in contact with us, you can call the phone number 866-904-5087. We would be so happy to show you guys how it works and really show you the benefit of using an online system to train your employees, make sure they're safe and healthy, and at the same time document everything that you're doing. You know, we talked about the importance of that, so it's kind of a one-stop shop there. So Monica, do you have anything else you'd like to add? I think that's pretty much all I have.
No, I would just say that one thing I will say about online documentation is when I was with the government, we switched over to online documentation for the very reason of you can monitor who is looking at it but not acknowledging and all that kind of a thing because of the metadata. And it's helpful for defending to show you sent it out, but two, that the person read it, whether they acknowledged it or not. Hopefully they acknowledge it, but if they don't, then you still have got a record. And as a lawyer, I've used the electronic records because it's just, there's no bias there. It's a computer, so.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I want to say thank you too for joining us. You have given us so much information that, you know, really is going to get that conversation started about some of the things to look out for, some of the things to be prepared for, and hopefully help people come up with, you know, just be proactive in finding solutions for stuff that could happen. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will sign off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.